Why has Pope Benedict Ratzinger asked for his name to be removed from a co-authored book by Cardinal Sarah and himself? It's called From the Depths of Our Heart in English, and it's been a bit of a controversy over the past week with Archbishop Ganswein and others involved in who said what and who wrote this, who didn't write this. And I'm joined today by Bree Dale. She's going to walk us through the controversy and the timeline of what went on. Bree, how are you? And welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing very well.
Good. Okay, well, we're going to begin with our prayer, and then we'll go right into the events and kind of give everyone the narrative, and then you and I will do some commentary and try to explain what's going on here. Sound good?
Great.
All right, here we go. Let's pray. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis odie, et dimite nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. All holy popes, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen.
All right, Bree, so what's going on here? You know, I heard that there's this book coming out, and it was going to be this challenge to Pope Francis because it's going to defend celibacy. And my first thought was, look, we just had a Pacha Fest over in Rome with idols around, and yes, celibacy is important, but there's bigger fish to fry. But I guess it is interesting that we finally have Benedict Ratzinger breaking the silence with this co-authored book with Sarah, who's been so silent. As I always say, he wrote the book on silence. And he finally kind of comes out big, and then there's all this controversy. So what happened?
So starting January 12th, I believe, there was an announcement that this co-authored book had been written between Sarah and Pope Benedict, Pope Emeritus Benedict. And it was, like you said, it was presented as a book on celibacy, kind of defending celibacy, but the focus really is more on the sanctity of the priesthood and the need for the sanctity of the priesthood. And I've been blessed to be able to see an English version, and I'm reading it right now. And I think if people were to look at this as a standalone book, I think it's going to be very much full of wisdom, obviously, richness, kind of reconfirming what we believe in the Church about, especially in the Roman rite, the need for celibacy in the priesthood. But it was, by some accounts, as soon as it was accepted, what I saw from, and I want to actually qualify this first with my background having a focus on politics, international affairs, and that what I look at the Vatican in multiple ways. Obviously, as a Catholic, I look at it as a spiritual institution founded by Christ, having 2,000 years of sacred tradition and history. But, we also have the politics side, the human side, right? So we have to look at those things and really see that there is a Vatican two-step, very much like the Washington two-step, right?
Mm-hmm.
People play the game. And so I will focus on that, and I'll try to qualify that every time and say, this is my opinion coming as an assessor for politics and international policy. And I'll also try to focus on this as well, giving my as close as possible, and something that I have been really, and that's like focusing on, journalists being unbiased and presenting the facts with as little editorialism as possible in order for people to decide, because we know what happens with the left. In particular, but it also happens on the right, where people use the Alinsky tactics. They don't have to tell the truth, and they don't present corroborated facts, and they can lie. And so when you have the truth, why do you need to editorialize too much? So that's kind of my thought process. I mean, there's a need to explain for a lot of people who don't understand, and that's important. So that's why we're doing this, right? But to backtrack, when you look at this book and you see it as a standalone piece, it's going to be filled with richness. But if you start to see where people were pulling it right at the beginning, especially what I would say on the right or the conservative side, it was pegged as this is the answer to all of the problems from the Amazon Synod.
Right.
And that's really a problem because it actually isn't an answer. It's as I was saying to my friend Stephanie Nicholas today, because she's trying to catch up right now. She hasn't been paying attention. She's like, I'm confused on what's going on with the Sirah book. The information, the content was quickly usurped by the process. So I'll go into that in a second. But the content of the book is, like many of the books that have been written over the last few years, addressing a problem, but not coming up with solutions. And as a former military officer, I can't help but say, leaders are supposed to lead from the front. Like you and I, it's above our pay grade to say, go do this, right? Because we don't really know the answer to the problem facing, like some of the real heterodoxy and error that's coming out of, say, Germany or certain camps. We could say that's wrong, and we can offer solutions like go do this, right? But we're not the ones who have to lead.
We can say things like pray the rosary, find a reverent liturgy, these kind of things. But we can't say, as a cardinal would say, hey, we need to mobilize this.
Right. And so there have been, processes, and I actually made this point the other day with Cardinals End's presentation, back in July. I did the report. I broke the story for LifeSite on Cardinals End's dubia, and I translated and presented that. He put that on his website after he had presented this to Pope Francis and Cardinal Parolin. And almost 6 months to the day from doing so, he then presented the dubia again, but to his brother cardinals. And so it follows the scriptural, when your brother sins or when you have your brother's in error, go to your brother first and take two witnesses. And then, and that's in Matthew. So it's the same thing with the dubia cardinals. They have, Cardinal Burke and Brandon Mueller, and they went to Pope Francis, spoke to him, presented the dubia that they had in private, then put it into the sphere of the cardinals, and then presented it to the public. So that is, there's a process to doing that, but only they can do that. We've had theologians present things. Theologians can present it because they're qualified. Journalists who may not have a theology degree can present the facts, but they're not really qualified to say, hey, this is what you do to fix it, right? So that's something that we have to look at. And in the scope of the books that are coming out, they are like, writing eloquently about a leaky roof, but not actually fixing the roof. So I think there are a lot of people right now who are saying, okay, this is great, and I'll meditate on this as a standalone book, but in the way of addressing a problem, it's not really addressing it. It's good for posterity, but what next? You're wearing the red for the reason. So if you really want to die on this hill, right, you've got to actually stand and do something. You need to provide some kind of, other than pray, because we know we have to pray, provide something actionable, because people are needing leaders now, and we don't have shepherds. And so that's what I'm getting already from, what people were hoping for this book to be the answer to that. And I think that's when the process overtook the content. So that was the 12th. On later that day and into the 13th of January, and all of this past week, we have seen what I call disinformation operations take place. So it was the next step. So when you read Cardinal Sirah's declaration or his statement, which I translated pretty quickly from the French to the English, when you read that, you really do see him address all of the issues that he was actually anticipating being the case for this book. So the rhetoric, the pushback, all of that, he anticipated that, and he actually made it clear in his statement that he made it clear to Pope Benedict that he knew it was like maybe not timely to do it. But there's really no time to do it. Like you're gonna get pushed back, and he knew that was going to be the case, and he made it really clear. And Pope Benedict said, I've been writing on this and I've been thinking about this for a long time. So I think people also need to read this book as a standalone book, not focus just on the Amazon Synod, because they started writing these things well before. And when you start to read the book, you can see like there are instances where it looks like Cardinal Sarah has taken things from speeches that he's done or lectures that he's done, and put it in. So they're notes, they're thoughts coming from their prayer, and it's intellectual. But we started to see this disinformation operations, which actually was quite surprising to me, because the Tornielli, the director of the Vatican Press, came out with a really just good like blanket article that just kind of directed, like just focused on the book itself, and said, they are claiming, complete fidelity to the Pope. They're not like looking to ruffle any feathers, but they are addressing an issue that has been addressed at the Amazon Synod. So, I mean, this is what is happening. And it's important for people who aren't in the know in the Vatican to understand that Cardinal Sarah, being an African pope, but also very close, and the prefect for the doctrine. No, he is not prefect of the doctrine of the faith, right? He's the for divine liturgy
of rites,
right? So he has a really important role. He's known as kind of conservative. There are individuals who will say that he is in the running for the papacy. Whatever, who knows what that is. But he's been kind of pegged as the maybe potential savior for, on the conservative side. I hate to hear that, because, it's all speculation. But he was at the Amazon Synod. We didn't hear anything from him then. But he is a powerful figure. He is recognized as an expert. And then he's very good friends with Pope Benedict, and he's the emeritus Pope. He has a very central role in the Vatican, even though it's a silent role. He has a central role. So when two of them come out with a book focused on celibacy and priesthood, and that being kind of a key point out of the, that people are hoping for some kind of answer, a resolution on very probati, or, in some cases, certain cases, married priests in the Amazon region, coming in this apostolic exhortation, which, by the way, I think LifeSite, John Henry Weston, published a corroborated report this morning from a letter that was sent out to the bishops and the cardinals, saying that is imminent. So it should be happening in the next few weeks, maybe at the end of January, beginning of February, that we're going to see, according to this particular letter, we're going to see that apostolic exhortation. So it's right around the corner, where the Pope is going to, confirm some of these things that were discussed, including the married priest, the very probati. So we've got Sarah and Pope Benedict saying, look, we have a filial devotion to you, but we're addressing this particular concern that's been in the church for a while and been discussed for a while. And then the information operations start. So the focus is no longer on the content of what's in the book, but they use the Alinsky tactics, Alinsky Rule 13, make it personal, right? Isolate the person, make it personal. So what ended up happening is certain individual members of the press, or commentators, whatever you'd like to call them, who are in some ways directly connected to the dicastery of communications, Tornielli in particular, but directly connected to the dicastery of communications in the Vatican, or indirectly connected, started producing reports saying that there was unnamed sources close to Pope Benedict who said that he never even saw the manuscript of this book, that he wasn't an active participant of that. And that is something that I want people to pause on, because I just said uncorroborated anonymous sources. That should be ding, ding, ding for any kind of journalist worth their salt is not going to provide you, for their main substance of their report, uncorroborated anonymous sourcing. They do it on the right. They do it on the left. We see it happening at Gateway Pundit. We see that happening in the New York Times. And what are all those called? Fake news, right? But that is actually foundational part of information operations. So it should be the first thing and I have been pushing this out for, a year now. We've been discussing this. Never trust, always verify. If I put something out that says an anonymous source without providing, corroboration, I want every single individual right here to call me out on it, because I'm a journalist, and that is not acceptable. If you are reporting, you're going to have cooperation. There are some times when you have to have anonymous sources, and that's when you provide your editors with proof of who those individuals are. You can provide emails if necessary. We saw that happen with multiple journalists where they've had to publish audio of conversations they've had. So that's happened in the past. But in this situation, these particular journalists come out and say someone close to Pope Benedict said he never saw this manuscript and is not part of this book. So the lie is started, right? They have the narrative. They're holding this position, and now it's time for Seurat or Benedict to defend themselves. If that was the case, Seurat would not have any documentation otherwise. But instead, Seurat comes out with multiple posts. His first post was proof of communication, email, letters received from Pope Benedict to him specifically on this book, and he publishes that, right? And he says that there are individuals who are trying to spread smear campaign, and this is, I forgive you for that, but this is the proof, right? So now Seurat is on.
Just real quick, yeah. I think we're assuming that everyone watching actually knows the narrative, and I want to. Right. Some people have not heard any of this, or they've only seen one headline. So I'm just going to kind of run through it, and you tell me if it's correct. There's the big announcement that a book is coming out by Benedict XVI and Cardinal Seurat, and it's going to be about celibacy. Immediately, there is this huge media push making this book into a meme of anti-Francis, anti-Amazonian synod. Yes, then there was a pushback from the left, Austin Ivory type, saying, basically, how dare Pope Benedict XVI try to retaliate against Francis? So there is this dialectic, right, between the right and the left, and it was an Amazonian book.
But not only that, he said at first that it was actually Seurat lying about the collaboration, right? So it was that,
yeah. And so then Ganswein got into it and said, well, Benedict's removing his face and his name from the book. He wasn't really involved in this, and kind of insinuated that Sarah had sort of looped in Benedict in order to sell books or promote his own cause, either to sell books or to become the next pope. And then Cardinal Seurat said, I've got all this documentation going back to September 2019 showing that Benedict was, in fact, a real author, and that his voice and his mind is integrated throughout this book, and he had agreed to it. Did I get all that right?
Actually, the last two parts we want to switch. So it actually occurred where Seurat presented the cooperation to, the letters at first. Yes. And then he said, tomorrow, this was late at night in Rome, he said, tomorrow I will speak more. And then he sent out the next day, very early morning, his French, statement. And that puts into perspective a timeline. And again, my English translation is there. In a timeline to, at this date, I did this, I met with, and it was very detailed and supported by those photos of those letters. So he is now on the high ground. Yeah. Within a few hours, we end up seeing Ganswein coming out and saying, Pope Benedict would like to remove, he's made some contribution to this, but he's not a co-author. All of these things start to take place, which is very confusing because and Ed Penton went ahead and updated his article on this as well, just kind of the breakdown of everything coming from, again, Seurat's timeline that he provided and cooperated. Ganswein says, I want to, I'm speaking on behalf of Pope Benedict. We want to remove his face and we want to remove his name as co-author. He's just a contributor, and, remove his name from the introduction and the conclusion. And it's very clear prior to that when you read Cardinal Seurat's declaration that, Pope Benedict approved the cover. He makes it really clear. So what Ganswein says is after the point, he is saying that he hadn't seen the cover at first, and then he kind of backtracks. But he makes it really clear. He saw the cover, he saw the final manuscript, and Ed Penton confirmed with a named source, and that you can find that at the bottom of his article, his update. He confirmed with a named source, the Italian publisher or translator for this book, said that he also witnessed Seurat providing this manuscript to Benedict, and actually the communication between Ganswein and Seurat, and Pope Benedict, that took place as well. Not only that, there has been confirmation that there was a communication that took place between the 12th and 13th, I believe. So right at that announcement, there was a communication that took place between Tornielli and Ganswein. And no one really knows what that communication was. It could have been just Ganswein giving him the information for the article that Tornielli wrote. But when we see this information operations take place and they focus on Seurat saying that he's a liar, and then they kind of walk back and say, well, it's impossible for him to have co-authored, Benedict to co-author, because he's really frail and sleeps most of the time. I mean, that was one of the arguments that took place. What was very disappointing to me is because I was watching this as a strategic communicator, Smee, and as someone who understands politics. What Seurat did was absolutely convince anybody who was watching this that he was in the right. He provided a timeline, he cooperated, and he left it at that. And he said, I forgive those who are trying to detract.
It's almost like he knew this was going to happen. He had everything documented.
Yeah, and he did, and he said it. He said it to in his declaration, that he said it to Pope Benedict, that he knew that this possibly was not going to be timely because it was so close to the apostolic exhortation, but he knew that this was something that was needed for the church to talk about why we have celibacy as priests in the Roman Rite, because a lot of people don't understand it. They think that somehow celibacy, like married priests, and you could speak to this coming from the Anglican side of the house. And you can talk to anybody who's part of the British Ordinariate who come over and become priests. They all advocate the celibacy in the Roman Rite. It doesn't mean that it's not a beautiful thing to be married. It's just there are consequences to being married and a priest, and the tradition in the Roman Rite has been celibacy. So
let me interject something there, because some people don't know I was an Anglican priest. Anglican clergyman before I became a Catholic. And I remember having done midnight mass, Christmas Eve, getting home at, 2:00, and then having to put together things for the kids for the next morning, like toys, and bicycle. I can't remember what it was, but I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. And this is the kind of thing that a married clergy would be subjected to. Imagine having to do weddings every Saturday of the year and trying to go on Saturday to your children's recitals and sports events and all of these things. Imagine having to go to the hospital and perform last rites at all manner of times while you have 5, 6, 7, 8 children. It's a very it's doable, but that doesn't mean that your wife and your children are going to be real happy about your commitment. So
yeah, and it's not preferred. And on the Eastern Rite, they have married clergy, but none of them are bishops for that reason, right? So the bishops are the ones who are who are celibate. And another thing that's really kind of important for people to understand is that, and I think this is the real key that people miss, is that that a lot of the individuals who are pushing the idea for married clergy are doing it under the pretext of saying because we don't have enough priests, right? And that's a whole nother area. But the real underlying issue is that there are people who say individual priests who have been abusers would not have abused if they were married.
Right.
And I think that should insult any man who is married, because it means that you have the predilection towards little children, little boys, that kind of thing. You can't control yourself. But because you're married, you can control yourself. It just, to me, it should be insulting to marriage, but that's kind of the foundational role in this. It really has nothing to do with the state of the clergy or whatnot. It really has to do with, that's going to fix the problem of abusers. But to go back and take a look at this timeline and to see what has happened, I think it's really important for people to understand that the focus now is, the narrative now is the process, and it isn't the content. like what happened? How did Seurat speak to Pope Benedict? Is Seurat attacking Francis? All of these things. It's just like the situation with the Pontifical Biblical Commissions book that came out. A lot of people may remember that this book came out talking about man, and there's a section in it that someone extracted on the left to say it was approving homosexual relationships. The Bible approves homosexual relationships. And then we saw Father James Martin take that and run, right? And then we saw, gay magazines coming out and saying the Vatican is approving homosexual relationships, that kind of thing that took place. So we saw that on the left, but you can read the document, the book itself, and it's like, yeah, it says some people in theology say that that's the case and others don't. Right. That's a normal theologian discussion, right? But on the right, we had unqualified editorialism happening too, where people are like, oh, shock and awe, oh, this is going to undermine the church, and oh, this document is horrible, and they hadn't read it either. So that is what we're seeing right now, because the Seurat book has not been read by people yet, and so they don't know what they don't know. And what has been said is that Seurat has made the declaration he has total filial devotion to Pope Francis, and so has Benedict. Okay, so you take them at what they're saying. The big issue that I took from this was that Seurat had the high ground. He put all of the individuals who are throwing out lies on the defensive to qualify their sources, right? They didn't do it because they didn't have those sources. Those sources don't exist. That's my guess. Or it could have been Ganswein, who was not keyed in to this. He could have not been keyed in. I don't see how that's possible, since Ganswein is his secretary, but it could have been. Seurat said the documents that were sent to him were sent to him like by courier and incognito, confidentially sent to him. So it could have been that Ganswein was just not keyed in by Pope Benedict. I just don't think that's the case. So I'm leaning towards more there's no cooperation there. But what ended up happening is that Cardinal Seurat, when Ganswein said, we want you to take, the name off, and on that, Cardinal Seurat came back and said, I've had a conversation with Ganswein. My statement stays as is. I've sent you that particular tweet from him. But then he also said, because of all of the attacks against my person and against Pope Benedict, I will go ahead and ask for his name to be removed as co-author. And then the next day, or within the same day, the English publishers, Ignatius Press, came out and said, we're not gonna remove him as that. He is co-author, because when you contribute a large majority of the content of a book, you're a co-author.
Well, don't you think the contract for the original version and all the translations, I've seen
it's
book
documented.
Contracts. I'm part of book contracts. It's very specific on the author, and sometimes there's even veto rights over the cover and approval of the cover. So all this stuff is taken care of with publishers and book rights. So you can't just have Ganswein saying, "Oh, he's off the cover now." He doesn't have that authority. Even if Pope Francis himself said, "Remove it," I guess that's a moral question of whether you need to be subject to the Roman Pontiff on this case, but Ganswein has no authority to make that decision, and he can't undermine book contracts that are already signed, sealed, and delivered.
Right, and this is about process. So we're talking about process and not content. And there's something that I have to say about the content, because a lot of people, again, were saying, "Oh, this is about celibacy. It's contradicting Francis, and Francis is now up, against the wall because Seurat and Benedict came out and said celibacy, so he's definitely not going to push that in the very probati priests, being married in the apostolic exhortation coming out." Well, if you take a look at Pope Francis's statements on these things, it's like many of his statements, he said personally he's against, married priests. He's like, no, but in some cases, maybe, so he said this and he's been quoted. But let's say he comes out in the apostolic exhortation and he's like, yeah, we'll continue to talk about it, just like he did with female deacons. We'll continue to study this, right? We'll continue to talk about it, but I'm not going to pass that, right? Okay. Is that a win for Seurat and Benedict? It will not be pushed out. As a strategic communicator, I would never push that out. I would say he continues the apostolic tradition. he has continued to be, his statements, like he is supporting his own statements. So to me, there's very little chance, there ever was very little, really any chance regarding the very probati. I want people to understand that just like in politics, when you have an emergency bill on the Senate floor and you need to get funding passed for like some kind of emergency, it is known the politicians will push certain pork into that bill to get it passed, right? Has nothing to do with the emergency, but somehow like frogs in South America are going to be funded because of the emergency. In that same way, I'm a little concerned about what else was pushed to the Amazon Synod document, the final document that's being pushed, that may be approved, that could be a little bit more unstabilizing in that region. It could be the Amazon Rite, for example. We saw a lot of the issues that we saw with the Pachamama ritual, what that was, and I do have an update on that. I have sent it into the editors at Register, so they have it now. The exorcists have come back with an update on that. So the 4 exorcists who spoke out and said the Pachamama ritual actually was diabolically influenced, and we are dealing with consequences on that.
Thank you.
They came out. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. But they were able to confirm that, right, based off of their own cases. They've come back and they've given us an update on the prayer that took place on December 6th. So it was efficacious. But, we saw that
in a bad way.
Ritual. The prayer was efficacious
in a bad way, right?
Well, the prayer that we had on the prayer fasting and on December 6th.
Okay, I thought you were referring to that there was the demonic work of the Pacha rituals were efficacious.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess they were efficacious because we had to fight against it. So,
but you're saying that everyone who was fasting and praying worldwide, that was efficacious. They confirm.
Yes. And they go into a little bit more detail on that. So I'll let you read that. But, when we saw the Pachamama ritual, who are the individuals who are going to be working on this Amazonian rite? Or is it those individuals who are pushing that out? There was just an article, I think, just published recently about concerns coming from politicians in Brazil, saying that actually, I read it was the president, I believe, of Brazil, who came down very, very hard on liberation theologian and close friend of Pope Francis, Leonardo Boff, saying specifically Leonardo Boff's movement of liberation theology, which really was part of the undermining, and I did this report of the Amazon Synod, those who domiciled at Santa Maria in Traspotina, who had the Pachamama statues there, which you reported on, those who were domiciled, that group are directly connected to Leonardo Boff. So we saw them like dancing around, and we saw the woman priest there and all of that kind of stuff. Those individuals were directly connected, friends to Leonardo Boff. Leonardo Boff being, a communist who has pushed he has pushed liberation theology. He has come to the Vatican and spoken. He, released right before the Amazon Synod, he released a picture of him and Pope Francis when Pope Francis was, I believe, a priest. Collaborating on liberation theology at that time. So there are real concerns about who's going to be making up this Amazonian rite if that's being pushed. So I would say, we've got questions on, whether women are going to be deaconesses. I don't think that's going to happen, but can we see a role be created for consecrated women doing more active roles in the Novus Ordo?
Well,
Maybe.
we got women reading, we got women handling Holy Communion, we got women cleaning vessels, we got women opening the tabernacle, distributing Holy Communion, we got women.
So maybe they'll consecrate that now.
We got women taking the Eucharist to the hospitals. We got women praying over people.
Yeah.
I mean, people are like, well, I'm against women's ordination. Are you against all that? Because that's an aberration from Catholic tradition.
Right, and that they may end up. I see nothing on this. But I would say as journalists, we need to kind of focus on that while keeping an eye, obviously, on the big ticket items that people are concerned about. But I do see elements of this being very distracting to the actual apostolic exhortation that's coming out and some of the things that could be done. So, as a journalist, again, I would highlight that people need to take a look at both sides. Do not just read LifeSite. Do not just read Church Militant. Do not just watch Taylor Marshall. Watch us. Trust and verify. Maybe distrust and verify, but watch us. But don't just take your information from one particular source. Even if you hate CNN, it's sometimes important to watch the Democratic debates to just kind of know what is being said to the vast majority. Because the big danger is the echo chamber of like minds. The big danger is the confirmation bias, where you are just being like, yeah, that's what he said, and good job, and all of that, and being only formed in that way, where 80% of the Catholic population don't believe in the Eucharist. So we want to reach that group of individuals and get them to understand what's going on in the church and why it's affecting them. And that's the important thing as a journalist to me, is to educate in that way, and to inform and not form people's opinions. And I'm seeing so much of the editorializing on both the right and the left, and they're unqualified to editorialize. I mean, you're qualified to editorialize because you are a professor in philosophy. Like, you can editorialize on philosophy, and you should. And I think more qualified individuals should editorialize, to give their informed opinion, standing on their credentials, and allow their peers to come back to them and, civilly, hopefully, but debate them. But when it comes to journalism, if you just don't, even if you've been in journalism for 30 years, you're like, you want to be able to provide, your sourcing. You want to provide that and let people decide. So.
Good. Okay, so there's two things that I want to talk to you about,
right,
beyond what and one is, who is this Ganswein?
Yeah.
He's an interesting character. I've been following him for years, and he is the personal secretary of Pope Benedict, Ratzinger. He's also the prefect for the papal household. Mm-hmm. So that means he's in charge of everything going on in the personal and domestic life of Pope Francis. And the way it works, as I've been told by several people, is in the morning, Ganswein begins with Benedict. Mm-hmm. Benedict has his mass. Benedict has his breakfast, his coffee, opens his letters, is assisted with his needs and everything. And then at around 11 or noon, Ganswein then goes over to Francis, and he spends the rest of his day with Francis. And then the next day, it starts over again. And you'll see Ganswein usually seated with Francis at most events, most Vatican events. When I gave the book Infiltration to Pope Francis, first I met Ganswein, shook his hand. He probably didn't know who I was. And then I saw him again later on. He's always there at the audiences and everything. And people will remember that he was recently at this circus event, which I'd like to show. This is the circus that happened, I guess it was a week and a half ago. When did this happen, Bree?
It was about a week. It seems like so much longer because the news cycles are
let me show this so people can get a shot of Ganswein. This is this weird circus event that happened at the Paul VI Hall. Let me, here we go. Bree, you won't see it, but people will see it on their side. So we've got all these people coming in. They got their circus gear on, their outfits. Most of this stuff, Bree, you would not be able to wear this to Mass. Nevertheless, in front of the Pope. I'm kind of confused about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, there's been a pattern of this kind of these kinds of shenanigans taking place all the way back to John Paul II. It goes back to, again, that whole, want to reach out, be more more personable Pope.
How does that relate to circuses?
I
would say personable. Maybe it's like a one-on-one intimate interview. Like, tell us about being a child in Argentina, or
Yeah.
how did you get your call to the priesthood? I don't understand how having 30 clowns dancing,
so
unicycle, and all that makes you more personable. It's ridiculous.
I don't know how many people actually really love circuses. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there because there is a market for it, but to me, it's always been creepy. It's never been like, this is me now talking personally. It's never been entertaining. It's a little creepy. Why are you wearing those outfits? Why are you doing those, like, it's not funny. I don't know. And I think it's really that aspect of trying to really hard. It's like, hate to use this term, the whole okay boomer thing. It's really trying too hard to relate to people, whereas people nowadays are Catholic.
I mean, look at this. This woman, how can you dress like this? This is basically a bikini and hot pants.
Well, I mean, they do. So I don't know, like, to me, it's off-putting. It's always been off-putting to me. It doesn't matter whether it's in like the civilian world or, I just don't see it like where there's like kind of any relating aspects to this, to the Catholic faith or Catholic culture or good art. But that's also one of the reasons why, like, we've bad art in the Catholic Church for the last 70 years, like art being made out of trash, and somehow that is supposed to beautify and inspire. Maybe it inspires like a very small minority, but for the majority, people are seeking to be able to detach themselves from the ugliness of the world and be able to find something that's sacred, that holds them. And that's why we're seeing a lot of young people who are pushing against what the world is telling them, going into, say, traditional Latin Mass, going and wanting more of the tradition and the beauty, because you don't have that in the world. You don't have something as full of substance and as full as of vision and beauty and symbolism that you find in the Catholic Church. You just won't find it. So it feels degrading to me. But it is interesting because you brought on Ganswein and like why he is there and why is he with Pope Francis. I don't have an answer for that. None of my sources have an answer on that. And I doubt that journalists on the ground will have an answer to that. I do believe that Ganswein sees himself as being a protector of Pope Benedict. I also think that Ganswein is loathed by many of his fellow priests from Germany and bishops from Germany. So I'm not sure, and I was speaking to a source, a well-informed source, a Vaticanista, who said
let me interrupt because the circus is still running on the screen, and I want people to see the Ganswein here. So
he's laughing.
Garrett Ganswein. He used to be, I guess he's still Gorgeous George. He's kind of a handsome, older gentleman. So on the shot on the screen right now, you'll see, Francis just threw a hoop, and he scored a goal, and everybody, thinks it's so cool.
Like over someone's head.
Yeah, it's so groovy. But right here, as you watch it, and again, you can't see everybody, throws it, and then you'll see Ganswein. There he is, right there. He's on the far left of the screen, and then there he is. He's clapping and laughing. He likes it. That's him right there. So he's
it's a great photo op, isn't it?
Is it?
I mean, in some ways, like in my opinion, no, but it does show this jovial, like really engaged Pope Francis, who's one with the people, which that is the image that has been very cultivated in this pontificate. That's one of the, whether or not, and I asked the question, does he feel comfortable? Again, this is me stepping out of my opinion and saying, like, as an assessor in politics, you have to worry about, and security especially, you have to worry about some of the security measures that have been kind of bypassed in situations like this. And
what if there's an evil clown on stage? What if there's an evil clown?
Yeah,
you could attack him.
What if they saw? But in reality, like the situation that we saw a few weeks ago with Francis being grabbed by a very desperate, we believe Chinese or someone from Hong Kong, a woman from Hong Kong or China, pleading with him, and his reaction being, to slap her hand away. The first question I had as someone who's a security SME was, like, our subject matter expert, for those who don't know what a SME is, was, was that like safe? Because she could have had a knife and stabbed him. I mean, that was a security concern.
Straight up.
Where was his bodyguard on that? Secondly, though,
Yeah, she could have
his
been a
reaction.
ninja.
Yeah, it could have been. But his reaction was what? He was frustrated, which makes me think, and we've seen this as a pattern. I presented another video which looked like he's like, he just doesn't like to be grabbed, which, I mean, I don't like to be grabbed, but if I'm the Pope, at this point, I'd say, like, look, I don't want to be in these situations where I'm going to be grabbed, you know?
Maybe as the vicar of Christ, you shouldn't walk around barricades shaking hands with strange people. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe if you're not comfortable, don't do it, right?
Yeah.
But there is this whole idea of he's one with the sheep, getting the smell of the sheep, this cultivated idea of the jovial people's Pope, right? So is he comfortable with that, or is that a persona? And I think what we see with like the clown situation is this persona of haha, jovial Pope, but it's not really, people are questioning the authenticity, and also just like, why are you bringing in clowns, But Ganswein, I think for him, in his situation, it's very similar to, I don't have really a home now because I've been the man for Benedict. If Benedict passes, when he passes, where's my home going to be? Is it going to be Rome? Do I have a place? Am I going to be forced retired? So I am seeing, this is just as an assessor, this is not me as a journalist because I have no corroborating evidence on this. I'm just looking at it as someone in the politics side. There's the potential there of him playing politics is high because he's trying to find his place, his next place. That's what I would assess.
He is literally the linchpin between Ratzinger and Francis.
Yeah,
in time, in space, in proximity, everything. And the fact that Garrett Ganswein is the one who spoke up saying, oh no, we're moving the names, shows to me it was kind of like the mask finally fell off. He's always been the sort of gentle nephew caretaker of Ratzinger. And then all of a sudden we saw him kind of get a little bit aggressive and take over the life of Benedict XVI. That's kind of scary.
It is. And it's the pressure too. The pressure coming from, is there pressure coming from behind the scenes? I would posit that that's a very high probability because of, we've got corroborated evidence. We've got proof that of multiple conversations, all of that taking place. Is there pressure coming from the Holy See or individuals behind the Holy See? Maybe it's not Francis. Maybe it's Maradiaga. Who knows who it is? But is that machine pushing Ganswein saying, hey, if you don't shut this down or make this seem like there's a back off? And that was the thing that really concerned me, was that Seurat, even though he had the high ground, he had completely corroborated, he didn't need to say anything else, stepped back. And so now it's not like confirming the conversation, but the conversation is now on the process and not the content. And that is a win for those who are pushing the disinformation operations. And they didn't have to tell a truth, right? They didn't have to. They lied. And they've never been able. They were on the defensive to corroborate their reporting, and they couldn't do it. And for some reason, Seurat he let them have the high ground again of being able to push a narrative. So, yeah. It's the situation.
Why do you think Cardinal Seurat, why do you think that he has been passive over the last 2 years? We say he's silent, but to me, he seems like he's been more passive. Like you're saying, we can write a book, but it's kind of like, I always do the paterfamilias analogy of my own family. If you have a teenager who is suffering from depression, you don't go write an article about depression.
Yeah.
You set up a game plan to help your child. If you have a child who is addicted to substances, you don't write an article about it. You help your child. And like you said at the opening of this interview, it seems that what's been happening amongst our leaders, I'm thinking here of cardinals, archbishops, bishops, is they're writing books. Like you said, I liked your analogy, writing books about a leaky roof and not actually calling a roofer or trying to figure out why we have a leaky roof and who is qualified to fix that leaky roof. And it seems that this book, it turned into a meme, but in reality, and you've read it so you can share, it wasn't a a big booyah against Pope Francis or
No, it
even
wasn't.
against the Amazonian Synod. It was pretty
No.
weak sauce, in my
It's not weak
estimation.
sauce. It's not weak sauce. It's like, again, I think you have to read it as a standalone book. It's one of those things that I was talking to another source about this the other day. Again, coming from the military background, you can take a look at General Custer, right? He was really bad at what he did. He just ran headlong into problems, and he brought his people with him. And I actually think that has been the majority of the, the tactics, misled tactics of a lot of the usual suspects that we find on the conservative side of of the church. I love Bishop Schneider. I love Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Zen. And Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Zen actually presented things to the Pope. Schneider has done it as well. So I can't fault them on that. They've done their duty on that as a brother to Pope Francis on concerning issues. And they had the high ground too, because there was nothing to be said. That if you say it one way, then you fruit yourself, and if you say it another way or you disprove it, then you might be in error. So you say nothing. That has been the assessment in regards to why Pope Francis has said nothing and not really addressed any of the dubia. But when it comes to going headlong and running into the battle, I think that's necessary. But in strategic operations, you don't do that in the military. What you do is that you have a group of common ranking officers who agree on a tactic and operations, and then you go into a battle knowing that can change, but you're all in agreement as a unified front. And if you're not in agreement, then you find the agreement before you go as a unified front. Imagine if Cardinal Burke and the other dubia cardinals had Cardinal Seurat with them, had look, we're naming names like, that we could put on our hands. We have so many cardinals out there, cardinals and bishops from the peripheries who have no clue that this is going on in the Vatican. They don't know the backgrounds because they're focusing on leading their, missionary territories. And I think it's important to actually identify bishops. As journalists, we are the ones who are responsible to go up and actually get them to speak. And if they're not willing to speak, to document they're not willing to speak. There's pressure that we as laymen can put on our leaders to lead. And that's what, Venerable Fulton J. Sheen said, right? Or Blessed Fulton J. Sheen, or hopefully one day Saint Fulton J. Sheen, or whatever, is to put the pressure on. So if we are a small minority of Catholics, and we are, who are knowing what's going on in the church, we have a responsibility to place pressure and not just to go to the usual suspects, because when we go to the usual suspects, what happens? You water down their impact by getting their comments and everything, right? You water down their impact because you're getting one or two, you're making them do the General Custer of running into the battle, but with nobody else behind them. And I think that's what's being missed here. So Seurat's book is just, to me, and it's necessary for posterity, but you can write a book and lead at the same time. So.
It seems that when Amoris Laetitia came out, and then the dubia were submitted, and we had the four cardinals, Burke, Brandmüller, and the others, may they rest in peace. It seems, especially if you read what Burke is saying and what he's doing, moving into 2017, which was also a big Fatima year, it seemed that there was a lot of encouragement and that there was sort of a bringing together of a team. Right. And something happened in 17 and then into 18 where that was shattered. And, you still see Brandmüller and Burke, we've been to Rome, they're together, we see them in the same room, they're speaking together. A few other cardinals come in and out, but everyone's kind of waiting for Sarah to join the party, right? To bring it in.
And the African cardinals, not just Seurat. Like, what about the other African cardinals? I know that Cardinal Lorenzi is now retired, but his voice was stronger than Seurat's. He was one of the individuals when I was there in 2005 living, because I've lived in Rome prior to this. When I was there in 2005 living, I was there for the entire conclave. I was asked back then by German press who I wanted to become Pope. And I, of course, my answer was whoever the Holy Spirit wants. But in reality, we were really hoping for either Cardinal Lorenzi or Cardinal Ratzinger at that time. And they were shocked because, these are young people saying that, like in union. And they're like, why wouldn't you want a progressive one? Because we're not seeking the church to change. We're seeking the church to lead, right? And to have a strong voice and to stand for the truth, not bend over backwards, not semper gumby. We're not changeable. The church just blossoms in times of trial. But when we see like Cardinal Zen, and we see Cardinal Seurat speak out, but they're speaking out separately. That's why it was such I think a threat to some individuals with, the authority of Benedict XVI to come together with Seurat on this. Now imagine if it was Benedict XVI, Cardinal Burke, Cardinal Brandmuller, Cardinal Seurat, Cardinal Lorenzi, and name other cardinals who are coming out.
Maybe Mueller.
And maybe not just, those who are considered on the right or the usual suspects, like getting additional cardinals to come on and say, look, there is some really concern. There's concern here, theological concern, concerns in leadership here that we need to address because the church is suffering on this. If we had something like that, people would listen. But
Bree, look what they did to the Papa Emeritus. They threw him under the bus in less than 3 or 4 days. I think maybe all these other guys know that there is major resistance in the inner circle of Francis.
Sure.
And if they do any of this, they're going to be tossed. Now, it's interesting to see that they tossed Benedict. Maybe this will give them a little bit more courage, fortitude.
But they're wearing the red. They accepted this mission. So in my opinion, it's like when you're leading from the front, that actually means you're the first ones oftentimes to get shot at. So, are they waiting for a time? I don't know. I thank God you and I can talk about this and we don't have anything else that we have to do about it other than to continue to try to expose corruption in the institute of the church because it's causing scandal both externally and internally. It's causing people. I said this to Father Richard Heilman the other day. Please, Father, if you can, on a regular basis, come out and present stories of miracles and God working in people's lives. Because I think that people really need to hear that nowadays as encouragement as much as because we're not seeing the leaders from the front. But they wear the red. They have the responsibility. And I think that's one of the things that I can appreciate, Vigano coming out and saying is that, hey, I'm looking at the end of my life here, and I have to account for this. And I didn't do things correctly, or I could have done things better, and I'm going to do it now. But running into the fire by yourself is never a good idea. It's never a good idea. You're never going to make the impact that you could when you're leading from the front with a coordinated force. And again, it doesn't just have to be the usual suspects. And I would actually say, as journalists, we have got to stop running to the usual suspects every time something comes out.
But I'm just to play advocate. Who else are we going to run to? James Martin's not going to give us a legit statement. Supich isn't going to. It's kind of sad that we are down to a handful.
I would
leaders.
make Supich. I have an article coming out which I engaged with Archbishop Paglia. What he provided me was not helpful to him, but you've got to it is our duty as journalists to get both sides. If you just get one side, you're actually not giving your due diligence to the people who are reading. Let them decide whether or not this is going to help Paglia, his statement, or not. But I'm going to provide that statement because it impacts him. And if I don't reach out to him, then I'm not doing my due diligence as a journalist, and I'm not being intellectually honest, right? Because I can be wrong. You and I can be wrong. And we need to be corrected if we are, but in a civil way and logically with provided evidence to the contrary to what we're saying. And that's the same thing when it comes to the bishops. Who Well, if you've got people who are on the ground in Vatican, those people are not doing their jobs if they're not beating feet and finding, additional quotes, and people who are willing to go on record. Like, they're not doing their job. But that's what we see in New York Times too. People not doing quite, because they're regurgitating other people's reports. So why should they? Like, why should they? Because no one's calling them to task,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I want to get a quote from James Martin. I would love that, actually.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk with him. I'd love to ask him for like specifics instead of the rhetoric. But I want to actually expose the rhetoric. So if they're going to provide, softball rhetoric, responses, I want to be able to provide that to my readers and say, on this hand, here's all the evidence, and on this hand, this is the response.
Yeah. Yeah, you know who did a good job of that recently was George Newmeyer, because he went into that kind of town hall with James Martin and caught him on tape saying all these things, right? And then also, he hounded down Cardinal Tobin and O'Malley and all these guys and got them on tape and kind of revealed a different side of them, a human, fearful side, which I think was helpful for people. But yeah, I guess you're right. We do need to be widening the scope, and
because we have the truth, right? If we have the truth, and that's the thing, is that you provide the truth as passionately but impassionately as possible, just directly, civilly engage. And I think that's why, like, when with Edward Penton, he's extremely civil with every person that he meets, regardless on what side they are. When they start to lie with him, that he'll pull things out real quick and say, no, actually, here's the proof on this, because he's had to do it. But he's civil with individuals, and I think it is also about being civil with. I may not personally like a priest or a bishop. I may find it really disgusting what they're presenting, but you know what? That's not about me at this point. It's about me getting the information for my readers so that they can make a decision based off of both sides. And I think because we have the truth, if we have the truth, there should be no fear of being able to do that. But I believe the tendency in what people tend to do is find themselves in their group of warriors, and it's it feels good to know that I'm being affirmed in this. I'm not the only person who's feeling this way, and you end up getting that echo chamber of like minds instead of healthy civil debate. So
what do you think is Gerd Ganswein the most important person in the Vatican machine? I'm beginning to think that he is. What do you think?
No. I don't. I think that he has a role that is walking on the edge of the knife. I think that he, in this point of time, has overplayed his hand, unfortunately, because he's going up against a cardinal as well, right? So yeah, he's the secretary for Pope Emeritus, but he's going up against a very well-respected, very truthful, and cardinal who just corroborated his entire report. So I don't think he really has that power. And if he thinks he does, he's maybe mistaken on that, because I think he is seen as more someone who's going out the door. I'm more concerned about the ones who are behind the scenes, who don't speak up a lot. Parolin, Meradiaga, the ones who don't speak up a lot but have a lot of power. Schoenberg is another. And who really are the ones who are influencing a lot. The German cardinals right now, really concerned about them. And it's not because of just the way the things that they're presenting to the church, and especially in the German church, but the politics behind it, the way that they're doing it, how they are actually ignoring directives that are coming from the Pope. That to me was a key point. Like this, we are literally seeing right now some rebellion coming from the German side, ignoring the Pope's directives on how synodality works. But it's not very surprising on that when you see that no one really actually. I interviewed Cardinal Burke a few years ago on this. What is synodality? I don't know.
Nobody knows.
So when you don't really have that definition, what the Germans are doing is what they envision synodality is. And Francis is saying, oh, no, time out. No. And there's not a lot of collaboration involved with that. So yeah, I think that there are movers and shakers, politicking. The Germans were very much behind this Amazon Synod.
So let me jump. I
Yeah,
want to jump back to this Ganswein thing because I think you're
yeah.
right.
Sorry.
What you just said is right about the Germans being so important.
Right,
Now, if we look at the meta narrative, we have an ex-German pope.
right,
His handler is an important German archbishop who's a
right.
Vatican insider, who's been a Vatican insider since the days of B16, and is in charge of the papal household of Pope Francis.
Yeah.
So the whole axis of power here is German. And this is why I think Ganswein is so key. It is because the biggest problem, the biggest pebble in Francis's shoe is that Benedict XVI is still alive.
Still alive.
It's
Yeah,
a
I've seen that.
legacy that mars his legacy every single day. And he must somehow mute Benedict and make Benedict forgotten. And I think that that is the role of Gerd Ganswein. And unfortunately, this whole thing, someone wasn't watching the correspondence of B16, and something spilled out, and we saw kind of the mask fall off. We saw what Ganswein's role is in regard to B16. I think this reveals the narrative of we have a German problem in the church. The Amazon Synod, by the way, I've said it before, was entirely German.
Yeah,
They bankrolled the whole thing, all the theology, liberation theology. Everybody thinks is South American. It's German. All of this is German. We have a German pope. We have a German handler. We have a German problem. We have an Argentinian trying to put the lid on all of this. And that's why I think Ganswein's really key. I don't think we should write him off. I think if he's not the most important linchpin in this, he's in the top 5, I think, within the walls of the Vatican City. What say you?
It's just as likely as not, I think, at this point. I think you make a really good point and a really good argument. Again, this is an assessment, and this is not anything that I can corroborate. And so as a journalist, I can't say that. But as someone who looks at the politics, I think that your assessment is sound. I would go back and say we have to take a look at how he was respected, or if he was respected by his peers, the German peers, and if he has anything that they can pull in regards to that. I just don't think on that end he is, and I think he is right now a man out for a purpose and a mission outside of what he's supposed to be doing with a very aged, frail ex-pope. Yeah. At this point, I think he's trying to do his best to protect him too, and I think he overstepped there. So I think that's that there as well. But again, as a journalist, I can't confirm or deny that because I just don't have enough there. So, but it's just as likely as not. So.
Yep. So where does this? I've heard Ignatius is going to go ahead and run the English with Benedict on the cover, with his photo on the cover. Is this just turned into a giant gaffe for Ganswein and the kind of counter resistance? Is it just this? I was thinking this morning, is this just a big ploy to sell a bunch of books? It sure pushed the book into the limelight.
Really good job for pushing. The thing is that for Ignatius to be like, we're not going to do anything about it. I try to think about like who's going to read this book, right? So, I look at my family being kind of that part of that 80% of like uninformed masses in the Catholic Church. And if I was to walk into a bookstore with, say, my father, who's an avid reader, who has your book, by the way, I gave that to him recently because he doesn't understand like the background of how everything has taken place. I said, well, this one professor has put some things together that I think, you should take a look at and then, read some of the other articles and see if it counterbalances and educate yourself. And he's doing it. But, would I walk into Barnes and Nobles, right, and with my dad and find an article or a book like this on the bookshelf, Pope Benedict and Seurat talking about problems in the church? Would he pick that up? Maybe he'll pick it up, maybe, because it's got Benedict's face on it.
Right.
And he'll maybe turn around. He doesn't know who Cardinal Seurat is. Turn it around, read the back cover of it, and see if he's interested. my guess is he'll put it down and walk away.
Yeah, because
And
just a correction. It's not these two men talking about problems in the church. As I understand it, it's them
no,
talking about celibacy, which most
right.
lay people are like, meh.
Well, but that to me is like a problem in the church, right? Like,
Right.
oh,
Okay.
again,
Yeah.
going back to that whole aspect of,
Got it.
this isn't about the Amazon Synod. This is about, why is a priest celibate? Well, he should be married, and we could get rid of the sex abuse problem. So
Right.
that's the way that I think their thought process would be to drive them to maybe looking at this book.
Agreed.
Do I think that 80% would pick it up? No. And that's where your book, for example, would be interesting, because people are like, wait a second, there's been an infiltration in the church. There's politics involved with this. It's interesting. It's like, Dan Brown, like in some ways, not to say that you're Dan Brown and fictional, but that the pull to that for the 80%, yeah. But coming from the bishops and the cardinals nowadays, I think people are just tuning out. Because of the sex abuse crisis, because of the financial abuse. So, and because no one's offering, proactive measures that laymen and priests can do to obtain, to fight this. So, I think, is it going to drive people to read the book? Yeah, it's driven me to read the book. I think it's a great standalone book, just to see why they freaked out about it. But that's the minority. It's the echo chamber of like minds who are reading the other, books by, Schneider, or, the others who are like, oh, yay, everything that I, understood to take place in the church already, it's just confirmation bias, which is not helpful, So, I don't know. I just think that the time is well past to stop doing, as Shakespeare says, words, 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 and start, leading from the front with a unified action. If you see a problem, come up with solutions.
Yeah. There's a common criticism against Ratzinger Benedict, and that is that he was a theologian and he was a man of words and not a man of action. Now, we can look at his pontificate,
Yes.
and there are some examples of action. Summorum Pontificum is the one that most people gravitate. That was a major act in the history of the church, restoring universally the traditional Latin Mass.
Right.
But mostly, Ratzinger Benedict's approach to the world has been to write things down. He's written a lot of books. I've read a lot of them. And,
Yes.
I'll get this book because people expect me to read it and comment on it, but I have really zero interest in it because I already know what they're going to say. It's going to say it's an ancient tradition. It's part of our patrimony. It's a charism. It's an eschatological sign.
Right.
On and on. I know what it's going to say, and generally I agree with it.
Yeah.
If they said, from the depths of our heart, Benedict XVI, Cardinal Sarah, on idolatry in the church, women's ordination, the homosexual crisis, boy, I'd be buying that. I would already have a PDF copy somehow, and I'd be reading it like no other. So it's kind of like too little, too late. They were writing this. It's interesting. Before the Amazonian Synod, everybody thought it was going to be about viri probati. And by the way, viri probati, for those that don't know, is viri, male men, probati, proven, tested. So the idea is married men who are older and tested would be ordained. That's why they say ordination, viri probati. That's what everybody thought Amazonian Synod was going to be. And it turned into be, hey, let's just incorporate Amazonian pagan rites into the church, women's ordinate.
Right.
It turned out to be a whole lot bigger than we expected. And I kind of wonder if Sarah and B16 were thinking, okay, we need to defend clerical celibacy because that's what the Amazon Synod is going to be about. That's what we all thought. And maybe they were kind of working on that in August, September, and then October happened. Wow. And so they're publishing it anyway, but I don't know. It's
Cardinal
just it's too little too late.
Didn't say anything. I mean, he was there at the Amazon Synod. He didn't say anything while a lot of other individuals were saying a lot to the press. And again, he's a man of little words. So when it comes to silence, I get it. But I hate it when I hear a lot of people saying, well, this person's going to be the savior. Schneider's going to be the savior. Like, stop saying savior. They're doing their job if they are actually standing up for the truth. So what we have to do as laymen, and those who for whatever reason, God giving us the graces to be informed in this, we do have to put pressure on all of the prelates whether we like them or not, to actually do their job and lead, because that's what they've been placed in. That's their apostolic duty and call. They are wearing the red for the reason. So and again, in my opinion, I think you've got the people who are the Vaticanistas on the ground over in the Vatican, whether it's the press or playing the game in the politics in the church as a cardinal or a bishop over there. But the majority of the people who are not really keyed into this, including cardinals and bishops, they don't have a clue about what's actually taking place in the Vatican, because they're focusing on their diocese, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important, throughout the world, for us to start to engage and say, did you know that this actually took place? Here's the proof, But when it comes to, and again, where are the other African cardinals behind, Cardinal Sarah and this? I would have thought that they would have come and to stand up in one accord and say, no, we're in unifying. But I think that Sarah fought his own battles. We don't need to have the other people come out afterwards and pontificate about it. He fought his own battles. Do I think he did it correctly? Like at the end, I'm not sure. I think he's a humble man, and he's like, well, I don't want this to fall on, completely on Benedict. He's a frail man, and I don't want people to push back. But then again, he also said, Pope Benedict, it's going to get a pushback. So I don't know. I do think there is, again, reading it as a standalone document or book, it's just good. It's filled with a lot of wisdom. And it's just confirming what the church has always taught, which is great. Maybe expanding a little bit more on some of the thoughtfulness on that. And some of the things that I've already read, just a little bit of it, kind of starts to indicate to me that Benedict has seen some of his mistakes, his early mistakes, and some of the things that he has said as a theologian, and he's correcting that as well in this book. So it's worth seeing that. Yeah. But I don't know. I think at this point, people are dismissing it because there's been no action, mm-hmm. And like you said, what we both have said, it's addressing eloquently the leaky roof without actually making moves to fix it. And I think you fix the roof first before you write about it. That's just
good call.
So
let me give you an imaginary conversation.
Right.
Francis, Ganswein, some other people in the room. Francis says, "Did we not know that this book was in the works? How come I didn't know that this book was in the works?" Ganswein, did you read these letters between Sarah and Benedict? How come I didn't know about this? Or is the conversation, we knew about it and it all worked out great. Good job, everybody. How do you think that Francis, from his perspective, is perceiving this whole controversy? Is it a net win or a net loss for him?
I think he is right now. If Francis hired me on as his strategic communicator, I would be saying right now, Holiness, that you have always spoken out, in support of celibacy. And so what you want to do now is just reconfirm, say, I'm very glad to have my brothers in the faith confirm celibacy. It's one of those things that we need to discuss more because of some of the crisis in the church. And I'm going to table that for now, but we are going to discuss it more about Vere Probati, because there are individuals who believe that that's the answer for in the Amazon region. But I've always been one for celibacy, and so I'm so glad that. So I would twist it. So it's like you are just supporting what I'm saying. Yeah. Do I think behind the scenes he's frustrated? I think he is probably very frustrated that there is even a thought that there could be some view of division from the quote ex-pope, as we've seen from like CNN and others. And recall, whenever there's some kind of controversy, especially when it comes to public affairs, in the last few years in the Vatican, it tends to end up happening that Francis ends up going over to Mater Ecclesiae and ends up having a photo op with them together. They pull out the Pope, and then Pope Francis is there to, what I'm saying. So yeah.
So you expect that there'll be a photo with Francis and Benedict arm in arm?
I would do that as a strategic communicator. I would actually say, at this point, let's get Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict and Francis together. when Francis announces the apostolic exhortation.
Kind
That's
of
what I would do.
make it look like Benedict is sort of approving of.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, and when you say I'm going to table the very probati, so it's like we're a unified front.
Yeah.
Win-win, because already Benedict and Sarah have said we support him filial devotion, all of this. This was never supposed to be an attack against Francis.
Yeah.
So it's, to me, if I was doing their strategic communications, that's what I would do.
Yeah, it's a prudent plan. It's interesting that Ganswein totally missed that memo. That would have been the better way.
Ganswein, no, but I don't think he did, because, like I said, Edward Kenton reported this. Other individuals witnessed the meeting between Sarah and Benedict with Ganswein, and Ganswein was also there later on to confirm that he had seen the manuscript and he was engaged with the cover for the Italian version. So something changed between the time of the announcement to the time, and I believe that there was pressure coming from one side. Yep. I think we saw this ridiculous, the bulldogs go out, that are connected, this disinformation operations, bulldogs connected to the Vatican Dicastery for Communications, being given a green light to go after that and make it personal about Sarah. Do I think that there was damage done to Sarah's credibility? I think there was. I think that there was a moment there that happened. I think it's lessened his. I think his choice to back down has lessened the strength of his voice.
It's more of the passive look.
Right.
It's a passive optic.
Exactly. And again, he did what he should have done, which was put them on the defense. So he should have left it at putting them on the defense. And I think Ignatius actually came out and said, we're just going to keep it because, like, you have no part to play in this. We have the signed document. And I am kind of interested, maybe a journalist can find out on this. I am full up right now with my move, but to find out whether or not Ignatius actually has, or the other individual, publishers actually have the signature of Benedict or Ganswein on their contract.
That'd be interesting.
So
Brumley,
or their lawyers. Yeah.
Yeah. So. that'd be really interesting, especially Ganswein. All right, you've read part of the manuscript. Have you read all of it? Where are you in it?
No, I'm about 15 pages in.
Okay,
so I'm not.
I mean, is there anything? Are they addressing? Does the word Amazonian Synod, you think, appear in the book, or Viri Probati, or any of these kind of controversial landmines covered in the text? Do you know yet?
I haven't seen anything so far, but I'm reading that and 5 other things right now. So, but I will say, it's the interesting part at the beginning in the introduction. They're addressing something that's even more critical to what's going on in the church today, which is modernism and relativism. And so they first talk about that, and then Sarah makes mention everything that we have to do in the way of action has to first come from contemplation. So he comes from his side of contemplation, which I concur with. Like Mother Teresa of Calcutta said that to her sisters. If you read Mother Teresa of Calcutta, she said, we are not social workers. We're to be contemplatives in the heart of the world. If you cannot, treat your sister in the convent the same way that you would treat the poor in the street, you're not going to be with us. So there's that aspect of you have to come into the world looking for Christ, but you have to start from looking at him in the Eucharist. And I think that was something that Sarah really puts forth in this document. So it's coming from a place of contemplation and looking moreover at the beauty of the priesthood and why celibacy is important here, and what the tradition of the church is on that. And it's superseding the Amazon Synod, and it's overarching, some of the Viri Probati concerns. But remember, Viri Probati has, and the push for married clergy, that's been going on for a long time. So this is not anything new. Yeah, centuries. It's not anything new. Again, what I'd say is, and what I'm going to be doing in the next few weeks as well, is to really look through that painful document, final document from the Amazon Synod, and identify other pain point areas that aren't really being talked about right now, because I really think that those are the things that are going to be approved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another potential win here for Francis is the statement you've referenced it several times by Cardinal Sarah, where he says, this is a quote, "I sincerely forgive those who have committed calumny against me and who put me against Pope Francis." He says, "My attachment to Benedict remains intact and my filial obedience to Pope Francis is absolute." So here he twice affirms that he's in union with Francis. He says he has no opposition to Francis and he has filial obedience to Pope Francis. So that's very clear. He also talks about his attachment with Benedict. And then it's interesting that he forgives those who have committed calumny against him. Any thoughts on Sarah's statement after the fact of all this?
I think it's incredibly noble that he came out, but he did that in congruence with providing the proof of his timeline. And so there was no question that calumny took place, right? So he saying these things should have left it at that, because he said all that he needed to say. And he actually came back with a tweet later to say, "I've spoken to Ganswein and my statement remains." And so at that point, and I sent that text, that tweet to you, that statement remains. And so that show of strength was very good. I just think that there was a little bit of a backtracking when he said, "I will agree to this." So, yeah, it's
he would agree to what?
To taking Benedict off as co-author. So that was during that whole conversation after he had made that statement. And then, Ganswein comes out and says, no, we need to remove Benedict as co-author. That's when Sarah came back and said, I'll go ahead and do that. And then he spoke to, he made the statement, "I spoke with Ganswein and my statement remains." So I think he took back some of the high ground. But again, we have to look at this at the 500,000 foot. As the unwashed masses of those who just don't care about the day-to-day things. The first 24-hour news cycle on this pitted Sarah and Benedict against Francis in this book, and Sarah regained the high ground, but I don't know how many people followed up with that.
Right.
And our friend, people who we know who are very active in the secular press have absolutely no understanding of what's gone on here.
Right.
So we are talking about process as informed people on the two-step of the Vatican, but when it comes to the content and what's really involved, I'm going to withhold my thoughts on it until I read the book completely to say whether or not there's really any correlation with the Amazon Synod. My thought process is that it's not so focused on the Amazon Synod. My thought process is reaffirming what the church has taught, and in eloquence and in contemplation, but it's not that saving grace that some people thought was, now we're going to have an internal struggle between two popes, So.
Final question: where does this leave Ratzinger? What does this change his position? Is he embarrassed?
I don't think he's embarrassed. I think that. Okay, I'll give an example to this.
Is this his second statement since he's resigned the papacy? He had a previous statement about abuse that came out last year. Remember, that was sort of delayed, and there's all sorts of shenanigans about it. And then there's this book. Is there anything else that he's released?
Yes, there is.
What is it?
He sent a memo last minute to one of the two dubia cardinals who passed for his funeral.
Right.
And I found it very interesting, again, as an assessor on the politics side. found it very interesting that he spoke very highly of this individual, this cardinal, and I can't remember which of the two it was. I'll
I
have to
think,
go
was it
back.
Kafara?
It may have been Kafara. I'm not 100% sure on this. It was, it may have been. But I do remember this very clearly because of the circumstances. He is very supportive of him. Remember, do be a cardinal. So he comes up very strongly in support of him and personally in support of him. And it was a surprise to the Vatican press office that he did this because it was last minute. Within 24 hours of that taking place, it was leaked to the press by members, I believe, of the Vatican press office. But it was leaked to the press that there were accusations against Georg Ratzinger. Old accusations.
Ganswein.
We didn't know. No.
Oh, Ratzinger. Yes.
Ratzinger.
The Pope's brother.
The Pope's brother.
Yes, it was like a
He looks
retaliation.
very much like him. Yes. It was no details.
Yes.
Just inappropriate behavior from 40 years ago or something to that effect. And then that died down within that week. Nothing really came from that. But I found it to not be a coincidence that as soon as what Pope Benedict did, 24 hours later, that came out. And then Benedict withdrew and was very silent again. Remember what he said when he was elevated to the papacy. Pray for me, for I'm surrounded by wolves.
Yeah.
He never wanted to be a pope. He made it really clear he wanted to resign to Pope John Paul II. John Paul II said, no, you must stay in the Vatican. He wanted to resign and retire in a monastery in Bavaria. Why is he still in the Vatican? And these are questions I have asked, other people have asked, and there are no answers to it. So I can't give a posit one way or the other. I just think people need to ask the question. Like, what's the usefulness of him being in the Vatican? He's no longer the Pope. And I think people on the left are right to say if he is resigned, then he cannot speak out in authority. But he's also a very well-known theologian. So he has the ability to speak out on authority. So there's just, and he's, also, a prior cardinal as well. So it just, to me, there's a lot of messiness. Yeah, there's a lot of messiness. Yeah.
Pope shouldn't resign. It's too much of a mess.
And that's the thing is that everybody's saying right now that there are whispers in the loggia right now about the fact that Francis is not feeling great now and is actually wanting to resign as well. That will be a mess. We'll have then 3 popes. So I don't know. He's cut back on his travel substantially 2020. And I think that's a good thing because, again, I don't think he's comfortable in the – people really just need to realize he doesn't like to be grabbed. Like, he's not very comfortable around other individuals. He may not like people, and that's okay. Right. You have that right to be, cranky if you're that age. I just don't think that you should cart out a pope because that's some kind of persona. And that, to me, is a public affairs, strategic communications move. And, anyways.
If I were pope and an old guy, I'd be by myself, no public appearances. I'd come out maybe like Christmas, Easter, Pentecost. You'd see me.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
I don't know.
I'd be locked up reading my books.
Yeah, I don't know, like at this point, what the future is going to hold with regards to that. John Paul II was very much a charismatic man. He liked to be amongst people. I think that Benedict really didn't want to do that. And he was the academic. He had the heart of John Paul II, but he definitely didn't want to do that. And yet he was forced to make those public appearances. And and I saw that really did, I think, wear down on him physically too. So I'm not surprised on that for Francis. I actually really do feel very badly for Pope Francis on that because I really don't think he's comfortable in the whole, people thing.
I agree.
So,
and like you said, that's not necessarily bad.
No. That's just a personality. But putting on a facade of another personality, that's a lie.
That's a
problem. And it's inauthentic, and it just adds to.
And the mask will fall off occasionally. You can't constantly meet crowds on a weekly basis. And I mean, who can do that really?
No, I mean, I would be cranky. And I would be like, no, but I'm an extroverted introvert. I have to have time by myself.
Right.
I really, but I honestly, if I was if you hired me as Stratcom's advisor to the Pope, I would say we need to cut it. And I think they have.
Yeah.
I think he may have done it, but I think they did too. So we need to cut out all of these public appearances. It's grating on him, and the persona is falling.
And while we're at it, let's cut the circuses. I don't want to see circuses.
Yeah. Can we just stop with the clowns? No one really likes
more
them.
Clowns.
No one really likes them.
Vatican officials, if you're watching this, cut the clowns. Disgusting. It's weird.
You could that the art is okay. Let's not do really grotesque art, but you could do the art thing. That can bring people together. But clowns, how do clowns bring people together?
Well, and they're not just clowns; they're scantily clad clowns. Where do you come up with those?
Really disturbing.
I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
Not at all.
So, all right. Well, this has been a great show. I'd encourage everybody to follow Bree on Twitter. It's on the screen. It's at Bree A Dale. You got to put the A in between Bree and Dale. You have a website, Bree. What's your website?
It's BreeADale.com.
Boom. So it's all about the Bree A Dale. I'd encourage, if you like this video, please like it. It tells YouTube it's a good video. And more importantly, please share it on Facebook and Twitter. There's a share button on the bottom right of this video. Please click that. And then all you have to do is hit Facebook or Twitter, and it'll automatically share it for you. That's a big help. Really gets the news out. There's a lot of people who are confused on this topic. And I think Bree gave us a really good analysis and history of what's been going on this topic. So please do share it. If you want to listen to this audio, you can always do that on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, all those podcast formats. Our editor, Daniel, is putting all those up within 24 hours now. I know there are people complaining that they were slow, but they're up faster now. And please subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you get more of these live streams. And of course, as we always say, pray the most holy rosary. As Bree and I were talking about earlier, we're not cardinals. We don't wear red zucchettos. We're not bishops. We're not popes. But who's higher than all of them? The Mother of God, the Theotokos, the Blessed Virgin. She draws us to her Son. Our Son is the King. He's the shepherd of the church. He has a plan. And through those beads of the rosary, meditating on the mysteries of the life of Christ, that is what we can do. And it's more important than making videos, reading books, talking about all these things. The most important thing is to get close to Jesus through Mary. And the rosary is the easiest and best tool, because it's hard to pray for 20 minutes. The rosary, you can pray for 20 minutes. It's a great gift. So everybody, pray the rosary every day. Don't lose heart. Don't be discouraged. This is going to be a long haul. This is not going to be resolved in 2020 or 2021 or even this decade. It's probably going to go on for a number of decades before we start to turn the corner. So pray the rosary, be patient, be joyful. Joy and I were talking about this yesterday, Bree. We were talking about, she was kind of getting discouraged. I said, look, these cardinals, even the popes, they come and they go. There were Medicis and Renaissance things, and in the 900s, there were horrible popes, corrupt cardinals, simony. All these things were happening. I said, it's kind of like going to Whataburger. It might be a weird guy at the drive-thru, but focus on the burger. You have the sacraments, you have the faith. It doesn't matter if the people who are making the burger or delivering the burger are corrupt and you don't like them, right? The substance of what we have as Catholics is faith in Christ and the call to beatific vision. So that's what we focus on, and we can't lose our joy. Anything you want to add to that, Bree?
Hold people accountable. Hold people accountable, because the truth is the truth. So hold people accountable. There are things that you can do. It isn't just pray. Prayer should be the foundation of your action, but you need to act as well. We can't just stand by and watch the bride of Christ. And I actually am more and more convinced that Christ is going to intervene in this, because he's promised it, and Our Lady has promised it. But as a priest I know says, God loves a good fight, right? And so he wants us to participate. So if we're not doing it and we're sitting back on our laurels, then why should you expect him to do the majority of the work? He's going to. We just need to do it as well.
I like that. God likes a good fight.
Yeah.
That's a be the Maccabee.
Yeah.
Be the Maccabee. Get into the fight. Get into the fight.
Exactly.
And the rosary is the weapon.
Yes.
The rosary is the weapon. So I like it a lot. So we'll close in our prayers. Appreciate everybody who supports the channel on Patreon. You can support. I'll send you signed books and other merchandise. You can do that at patreon.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall. Just sent out a bunch of books on Monday, signed books. Okay, so we'll close in prayer. We'll pray the Hail Mary, the Ave Maria. And I think we should offer this for all involved. Let's offer it for Ganswein and Francis and Sarah and Benedict and anyone else who's involved, that God will use it for his purposes and for the greater good and to draw people closer to him. And then we'll also pray a Glory Be, the Gloria Patri, and we'll just do this to thank God for our Catholic faith. All right, oremus. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio et nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, Bredell, thanks for being on. I hope you'll come back again and do some commentaries on these kind of stories. It's a really good perspective and very clear. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you as well.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks so much for being with us on the live stream and for all the comments. And we'll see you in our video later this week with Father John Hallwell. And we'll be talking about celibacy from his perspective as a faithful priest. So till then, Godspeed.